Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Horror Room. I'm Travis Bruce, and today I have a special guest with us. He is an author. He has a new book out right now, and it's called HINTERKAIFECK. It is a horror poetry book. I have with us John Garland Wells. John, welcome to the Horror Room.
Hi, good to be here. Thanks for having me, man.
It's a pleasure, man. It's a pleasure. So tell us a little bit about HINTERKAIFECK.
Yeah, so HINTERKAIFECK is I guess the best way I've pitched it is like a kind of a novella in verse. So it's one overarching narrative, but it is written in kind of a poetry style. And it's a true story, or at least it's based on a true story about a murder, or at least 6 people got murdered. I guess, I don't know what you would call that, a sexticide? Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
6 people died in a farmstead in Bavaria, and the farmstead was called HINTERKAIFECK, and it's kind of one of Germany's biggest like unsolved murders. So I tackled it with kind of a poetry novella style work.
So what gave you inspiration to, do a poetry style with this real life incident?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I've been doing spoken word poetry with a kind of a band for a long time, and wanted to kind of see if I could push it so where I could write, instead of one kind of, several stanzas, to write a whole thing. I've always really liked those kind of narrative poems, whether it be like The Wild Party or anything like that, where it kind of using poetry to tell a narrative. I've always thought that was very interesting. And admittedly, I have a big soft spot for true crime. So I was kind of listening to my podcasts and stuff and heard about that murder, and it would not leave. So I thought this would be a good way to blend the two things together. And since it happened so long ago in kind of a rural, like really snowy European area, I thought the poetry angle would be good. It almost kind of reads like a fairy tale or a fable, but definitely not for children.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now how close to the actual real story did you keep your story?
So I did a bunch of research. It wasn't like I listened to the podcast, was like, oh, I'm going to write that down. I looked into it. The problem is because the farmstead where the murder happened was so isolated, that is good and bad. For one, it kind of lends to the atmospheric spookiness of it, but it makes it hard to parse out actual factual details of kind of the nitty gritty of what happened. So I got as much of it as I could. I think if you were to look up the case, or you were to watch a documentary on it, there are several on YouTube and stuff. For the most part, I stuck with it, but I had to fill in the gaps here and there. And the biggest one was who did it. I don't think my book necessarily explicitly says who did it, but I have a theory based on what I've looked into, and so I kind of wrote it with that theory in mind. But as far as like the relationships between the family members and kind of the day-to-day of what happened and the lead up to it, to the murder, that all, as far as I'm concerned, is what happened, or objectively what happened. So as much as I could, I stuck to the truth, but filled in some gaps with my own inventions here and there to make it coherent and cohesive.
Now, is it easier to take a real life event and make a story into it than coming up with a complete brand new story off the top of your head?
Sort of, yeah, in a way, I think. I think a lot of times, especially when you're a younger writer like me, when you get going on something that's longer than a short story or a single poem, you can get kind of lost in the weeds. And I think that's part of kind of disciplining of yourself as a writer when you're making stuff up, the entire story. You got to get halfway through it. You got to kind of thread that needle of knowing how you want the story to kind of progress, and maybe kind of a rough idea of where it ends up. but not get yourself totally to that, because in the writing of it, you might find a different angle or turn a different corner. So for me, it was very helpful to have kind of at least a loose outline, like this is how it started, this is the murder, which is kind of the set piece of the book, and then the end, kind of the aftermath. It was nice to have those kind of way stations along the way so that I could kind of maintain momentum, I think. It's the first time I've written anything that is based on a true story, so I thought it was an interesting challenge. But yeah, I think generally it has been easier to write that, to stick to those kind of bullet points along the way that are true, like a timeline, I guess.
Now, do you worry, because anytime you write a book based on a true story, do you worry about any family who might come up, or loved ones who might feel inappropriate to talk about?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that has been a concern. I think that's generally a pretty good concern when you're dealing with anything that has to do with true crime. I think a lot of times the line between informative and exploitative is thin. Everybody who's listened to podcasts about true crime or watched documentaries, there's a point where you can watch it and almost kind of parse out if it's an exploitative thing, like if you're going for shock value or just kind of that visceral feeling, it feels a little icky. The problem was, that the crime itself was tremendously violent. It was a very, it wasn't like they were shot or anything like that, not to take impact away from that kind of murder. But, they were lured one by one into this decrepit barn and very methodically kind of mutilated, I would say. So it's a risk. I tried my best to maintain any of the lurid details to what would be shown in like an autopsy or what some more scientific kind of a clinical treatment of it, so that it doesn't come off that way, especially because there were children involved. It's really a horrific thing. And it was an interesting kind of tap dance, and I wouldn't be surprised, and I would be very willing to listen if anybody thought that it went that way. I think when you tackle true crime, that's kind of the gamble you're taking. I tried to also kind of instill like a frame narrative to where it's sort of a true story that's taken on almost like a boogeyman kind of feeling over the years in the book since it happened, which hopefully put a little bit of distance in it and kind of gave a built-in leeway for if it seems like it might be going in a way that makes people feel gross, but that was not my intention, and it was certainly a concern. It's definitely a concern.
Now, when you were writing this book, you were talking about, it was a concern of yours to not offend people, but don't you? But as a creator, is it hard to be creative and actually put your best work out there without? When you have that in your mind, I don't want to offend people.
Yeah, definitely. It can be a roadblock. I think can definitely serve as an obstacle. I think at a certain point, if in your head it makes sense and that's the vision that you have for the project, you kind of just got to say fuck it and go for it.
Yeah,
because when you're writing it, you could write that and then you could send the project off to publishers and they could say, this is gross, this seems ethically dubious or something. True crime, when you're mixing it with horror, it's a real tricky thing. And I think at a certain point, I had to just kind of trust myself and trust the people that I was working with on the book in terms of the editors and the publishers. So far, I haven't had anybody really say that it's offended them in any way that seems like it was done for the wrong reasons. But it certainly is graphic in spots. And we, the publisher had the idea of including the crime scene photos and some photos from the farmstead at the time. I think that was a good idea. I think that kind of corroborates some of the maybe the more macabre things and the more violent aspects of it. I thought it was important to point out what happened and the severity of the crime without dwelling on it too much, which I think is why a lot of the effort went to the build-up and the aftermath, even though the crime itself does make up kind of a big chunk of the book.
Now, you're a pretty young writer, and I know that there's a lot of authors who get tied up on comments or reviews from the audience. Is that something that you pay attention to? I mean, do you take negative comments or reviews to heart?
You know, I would like to say no. That might be a lie, though. You know, I remember the first thing I ever had published that was in a printed thing was 2016, 2017. I mean, I was pretty early on in college, and I submitted this short story that was kind of, I would put it maybe in like a Marquis de Sade essay. It was kind of the psychosexual, violent, you know, erotic thing. And I submitted it to Madness Heart Press, who was just kicking up at the time. Of course, now they're kind of a big deal in the small press world, but they were doing an anthology called Creeping Corruption. And so I sent them this story and they published it. And it was, you know, it was kind of a glorious moment for me as an 18-year-old kid. And yeah, and a couple of people reviewed it right off, like blogs and stuff, and there was one guy that said every story was amazing except for the one by John Garland Wells. I couldn't get past the third page, and I remember sitting there in class reading it and feeling A, that I was being punished for not paying attention in class, and then B, just going, God damn it, you know, like the one story in the whole thing. You know? And I've had conversations with that dude here and there. You know, it's obviously no hard feelings, but yeah, I mean, I've had some negative reviews of stuff before, and I like to say that I think the preparation for that is when you start submitting stuff, you're 100% guaranteed to get rejections, and a lot of the time you'll get like a form, you know, just like they send out a generic form, and a lot of people tend to be more hurt by those than like personal things, because the publisher at least took time to tell you why your book sucked, but I always would rather get a generic thing and not know, because every time I've gotten a thing, it's been like, this is terrible, you know. It's like, fuck, you know. It's like, I'm gonna go drink some fucking bourbon about it, and I'll be all right. But yeah, negative reviews. You know, playing in a band for a long time too. I've gotten some pretty negative reactions to what we do, and so I think hopefully my shell is hardened a little bit, but it definitely is. It definitely doesn't just go right through me. You know, I'm like, God damn, you know, I wish they liked it, but it's part of the gig, man. You know, it's part of the gig. I've met a lot of writers that stopped writing because they didn't like the rejections and the negative thing. I'm like, well, you just didn't have the balls to hack it, I guess.
but it's kind of deflating. Like, so when I first started my YouTube channel, I didn't know what the fuck I was doing. You know what I mean? I honestly didn't know what the fuck I was doing. I literally, everything I did, I learned by mistake, trial and error. And like, and oh my goodness, the comments were so fucking deflating. I remember in my first month, I was like, oh my goodness, I'm fucking done with this fucking shit. I don't want to fucking do this anymore. Like, I can't take it. But like, you just gotta fucking push through, because everybody has a fucking opinion now, right? But not only does everybody have an opinion, but they can make it seen worldwide. So like, you just have to just brush your shit off.
They have an outlet, you know, now that just so many people have blogs and YouTube channels and Goodreads accounts that people follow, and you know, I mean, it just is what it is. I think anybody that tells you that they don't care at all is a liar. I mean, it's your shit, man. You know, you're like, it's what you're doing, and hopefully what you want to do. You know, if you could professionally. So,
I've never.
And the more you publish, I think the.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I think the more you publish, the more you'll have to expect that, because if you are doing it right, you should kind of have momentum and get to wider and wider spaces, you know, and you know, so it's a thing. It's part of it, you know.
I'm gonna say I've never in my life went on. So I'm a big reader. I do Amazon, and I've never in my life and I'm a big reviewer when it comes to certain things, but I never ever have put down, oh my God, this is a shitty book, or this book is awful. I never gave somebody a 1 star. Never in my fucking life. Even like a movie, I would never go on somebody's IMDb and put down 1 star, biggest piece of crap ever. Now I would do that with businesses and restaurants.
Oh yeah,
you know what I mean, stuff like that, because you know, at the end of the day, they got to fucking do better. But like when it comes to someone's artistic work, I mean, come on now. I mean, no, I never went on somebody's YouTube channel and fucking commented, "Oh, you're a dumbass. You're a
big dumbass."
I've never done that. I've never given somebody I've never given somebody a thumbs down before. Like I've never done that.
No, I just you know, go on living my life like a normal human being. It takes a lot of time, and it takes a lot of time and effort to sit there and like come up with new ways to shit on somebody's thing. You know, I mean, I've read terrible books for sure, but if I really get angry about it, I have on my phone. I go on the notes app and I exercise that, but I don't do it for other people to see. You know, that's not for me. You know, and
I'm like, wow, you must got something really going on in your fucking life that's fucked up.
Yeah, you are bored. You're a bored guy, man. Yeah.
You get somebody 1 star or a fucking thumbs down, like
the effort it takes is not worth it. All
right, so now so right now we're in 2024. What are some? I'm pretty sure. Let's say it's easier for authors to get their work out there now.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I'm pretty sure there's other struggles that you guys are running into. What are some? What are some struggles that authors are running into in 2024?
So I think the biggest one is that if you write genre fiction, you kind of have 2 outlets. Well, you have 3, I guess. Whereas in the old times, you know, even 20, 30 years ago, your best bet would be to go through, you got to query an agent. That takes a long time. And then your agent's going to try and get your book published. And there were a few imprints, and unless you were Stephen King or, you know, one of Anne Rice or something, your best bet was to get an agent that would get you into like a Tor or a genre press that's big. And so a lot of them would go through the big publishing houses. So it was tricky, you know, and there were, I think it was hard for authors, and it almost seemed like a pipe dream in the same way that like being an actor or directing a movie would be. That was actually what I wanted to do until I went to college. I wanted to be a filmmaker, but that business has maintained its difficulty in getting in there because it's luck based, but it's also, there's a lot of steps to go through, and there's really only one funnel. You know, I mean, you can make an independent movie if you want, but nobody gives a shit unless it wins a music or a film festival or something. You have to get into the Hollywood system. Anyway, so it was like that for books, but now we have a ton of small presses, and there's always been small presses, but small presses now are sort of, especially in genre stuff, horror, especially horror, they are finding a niche where they have like a following. So a big one right now would be Apocalypse Party. You know, people will buy whatever that small press puts out. So whereas the struggle for writers even 20 years ago was, how do I get somebody who will champion my book to try and get me a book deal with a publishing house? Now you can submit directly to the small presses, which is very nice, very convenient. You skip the agent part. The difficulty, though, is now there are so many small presses, it's like an overcrowded market. So I think it's important for authors to know that if you submit to a small press, you should do a lot of research beforehand about what that press does and what they can do for your book, so you don't have crazy expectations. I mean, the first time I got anything accepted by a small press, I was like, my life is going to change. I'm going to wake up tomorrow in Bora Bora. I'm going to be like eating sushi off of people. You know, it's going to be great. And that's not what happens, because they need your help, but it's a brand, right? So if you submit to a press and they say yes, you should know that it's going to be work for you also. Like, the press will print it theoretically and they'll market you, but you know, the biggest challenge I have faced thus far, which was a huge lesson. Sorry if I'm rambling, but over the pandemic, I tried my hand at I tried my hand in the novella through verse. I wrote this. This was not based on a true story. This was just the story of a guy who. It was sort of a serial killer kind of story, but it had kind of a psychedelic edge, and it was very weird. And I was looking for small presses, and there are a lot of tools on the internet that'll show you, kind of consolidate a list of, these are the presses, this is what they publish, this is how much they can pay you, royalties, that whole thing. And so I submitted it to a shit ton of people. You know, it's, in my mind at the time, it was a numbers game. You know, I'll just submit it to 30 small presses, and one of them's got to at least think it's decent. You know, I mean, that's kind of the hubris of a very early writer. But I submitted it, got a bunch of no's, but I got one yes. Now, the first red flag is he responded yes very quickly, and I was like, well, I don't know if he had time to read it, but in my head was like, hell yeah, he read it in 45 minutes and thought it was the best book you'd ever read. He just couldn't wait. So he published it, but it was a disaster. I mean, it showed up all out of format. It was this huge, ugly-looking book, and he didn't pay me royalties, and it became this whole thing, and it eventually went under. But that was a lesson in anybody can say they run a small press and upload PDFs and shit to Amazon. So I think if you're a struggling writer, or you want to be a writer, in my opinion, from someone who's like doing it right now, kind of currently in the shit, I would make sure that the person you're sending it to, you know, not all that glitters is gold, because they might not be able to help you in the way that you think. So I think it's now more of a two-way street of, I think this publisher is right for me, and then the publisher saying, I think this book is right for us. So it's still a lot of trial and error, but you have a lot more opportunities. You just got to make sure they're the right one. And I've had, you know, I'm trying to figure that out currently as well.
And like you were saying, so like I've noticed just in the indie theme. So when I say indie, that means, you know, the indie author scene, book scene, horror and movie scene. There's a huge influx of creators, authors, filmmakers. I mean, it's kind of crazy. It's awesome, but fucking kind of crazy at the same time. And but it's great that, you know, that everybody's getting their work out, but there's no gatekeeper to you know what I mean? So like, if you're a reader like me, how do you know who's who and who's good? Like, you just buy 1,000 books a fucking week? Like, it's just so many creators out there, so many authors, and so many books, so many titles.
Yeah, it's inundated. You know, I mean, it's like this huge sea, and that's why I think the future of that kind of indie horror, speculative fiction is really not. It's moving away from the author and towards the publisher. So, I mean, there are people that'll buy anything that Apocalypse Party puts out, or Madness Heart. They trust the curator more than they do the people that are making up the roster, which is cool, because it gives a lot more opportunity for people that are writing in that vein to get their work at least looked at by someone that can help them. But because it's so vast now, and you're right, like, it becomes less about who wrote the book and who put it out, at least in the indie world, which is why small presses are very particular about who they take. But if they take your book, the upside of that is that they'll probably take your next one also, because they're trying to, I mean, a good example, I guess, would be like B.R. Yeager is just having a fucking huge time because he put out Negative Space on Apocalypse Party, and then it has gone on. But, Word Horde is a big press. So I think that's kind of the quid pro quo of it, is that maybe not everybody will know your name or look forward to your next book specifically, but they will probably buy it because they trust the curator, the people that are championing your book and putting it out. So I've had to reconcile that with my delusions of fame, but yeah, it's so.
So how do you feel? What do you feel about self-publishing? What are your views on that?
Oh, I'm gonna get in some trouble. I don't do it. I'll say that I don't do it. I wouldn't do it, and I don't particularly read a lot of self-published books either. I think I do think there's a bit of a stigma to it. I think I'm definitely coming off a little pretentious, and that's fine because it's how I feel. But if it gets published by a press, even if that's just one dude in his basement that thought your book was cool, at least there's a kind of a stamp of approval, or at least it went through some kind of gate. Now, I know there are a lot of authors that have started in self-publishing and not only got their books published, but became big time things. I mean, my day job is I manage a used bookstore, and over the years I've seen, like, one of the biggest selling authors right now is Colleen Hoover. I mean, I don't fucking get it, but people seem to love her. She started off self-publishing on Amazon, just the print-on-demand kind of thing, and now I think she's on Simon & Schuster. I don't know. She's making a shit ton of money off of writing the same book over and over. But self-publishing, it's not the pariah that it used to be. I think at a certain time, even when I really started writing short stories and stuff in like 2013, 2014, it was still kind of you didn't get a publisher, so the book must be really shitty, and the only way you could get it out into the world is if you did it yourself. I don't think that's true anymore. I think there's definitely an outlet for it. I think I just have like a weird thing against it, but I don't think it's a bad way to go. And I think there is a beauty in having complete and control. I think people that are good at e-commerce and marketing on the internet and kind of finding a way to push their book in the right places, it's certainly not a bad idea. And you can build your own kind of brand on it. I felt the self-published books I've read. Okay, that's fine.
I'm just really about one thing. See, now I'm about to get myself in trouble. I don't think most self-published authors do a good job of marketing themselves.
No, I agree. I think if you're good at it, that's a way to go. But I think a lot of people that try are not very good at it. It just doesn't and it looks. Go ahead.
And I would say, I interview. Oh, see, I'm about to go so much. I interview a lot of self-published indie horror authors, and I'm not saying all of them, but some of them are definitely introverts and socially, it's a little bit socially awkward. Which I'm an introvert. I'm a little socially awkward, but listen, I do a fucking YouTube show, so I gotta break that fucking spell. But
Yeah.
but like but how can you be a little socially awkward and an introvert and market yourself? You can't. You know, that's a hard fucking struggle to do.
Yeah, it definitely is. I know that. I mean, there have been several self-published horror authors that have kind of bubbled up to the top of the social media. You know, I mean, I'm not on TikTok. I can't stand the thought of doing that. I only really browse the other social medias when I'm like on the toilet. Like, that's the only time I can bring myself to get on Facebook or something. But no, I mean, but there have been a lot. And working at the bookstore, I've seen them come through. A big one last year was a book. No offense to anybody that enjoyed this. I know there's a lot of people, but there was a book called Playground by a guy named Aaron Beauregard, and he self-publishes, and he has kind of a cult following, and he does like extreme horror, you know, like that splatterpunk kind of really, really gross, and the idea is to be gross. And it was big. It was a huge book for like 2 weeks. I mean, the problem with the social media bubble is that it comes as quickly as it goes, but he had a moment, and I read the book. I mean, I hated it. It was a slog because it needed an editor. Like, I think that's a beautiful thing about going through a press is that somebody has to edit your book. I mean, if you self-publish, you should at least get somebody that you know to edit your book, because no matter what, you cannot be objective about this. And I know a lot of authors that are very protective of their work, and they don't like the idea of having an editor. But at a certain point, you got to fucking get over that, because there were so many passages in that book. Like if he had gotten, and there are a ton of splatterpunk grindhouse presses that would have taken that book, and that probably already know who he is. And my God, I mean, it was almost a 300-page book. It could have been a 200-page book, and it would have been a better book, I think, in my opinion, because I think that's one of the biggest advantages. I mean, not only are they going to take over a lot of the costs, they're going to eat that printing cost, which if you self-publish, you're probably going to do print on demand. You're probably going to go through Amazon, and that's fine. That's also not the pariah it used to be, but there is definitely a noticeable look to a self-published book, and I think whether it's fair or not, people who seriously read can usually tell. You know, I mean, there are some exceptions where, like, I didn't know that was a self-published book, but for the most part, they have a look and a feel because they're not done by people who do it a lot, and what they want, as opposed to being a writer, they want to be a publisher or an editor, or they have training in editing. Writers are terrible editors of their own book. You should never do that, in my opinion. I can
imagine, yeah.
Even if you're going to self-publish a book, you should, like, it's because the margin of error is just so bad. Like, you're going to overlook things, and unless you're writing a book to self-publish and then sell to yourself, I don't quite get the practicality of not at least trying to do that. I think those extreme horror, even in a genre like horror, which is designed to unnerve and unsettle, at least in some way, there are those that want to write the furthest they can get, and if they don't want to go through a press, that's fine. I find a lot of those self-published books to be very specifically for a niche group of people that probably aren't looking for the literary value of it as much as they want to get from set piece to set piece, and that's fine. That's just not for me. It's just not for me.
I mean. Listen, I've read some great self-published books. I've interviewed tons of great self-published authors, but I also read some self-published books, and I've said this many times that like it was unreadable. Like it wasn't that it was a bad story, but it was, there was run-on sentences for a whole page, and there was like words missing, or it would be like the flow of the story was off. It was like, wait a minute, well, who is that? I don't remember. Like,
I don't.
It was hard to read. It was hard to follow.
Yeah, I have a coworker who she does both. She publishes with anthologies and small presses and magazines and stuff. She self-publishes stuff, and it's funny because she having done both and usually does work with an editor even if she's self-publishing. She expresses frustration in the fact that because anybody can self-publish, that it's just so diluted of a pool. It's really hard to find a well-written one. Not that there are certainly that they're out there, but I would say, like out of every 5 self-published genre books, 1 or 2 of them are going to be probably actually worth your time and polished. I think that's the thing. I mean, inevitably you're making a product. You want people to buy it, consume it, read more of it. And readers that read a lot, typos and bad pacing and really bad grammar will fuck you up. I mean, it's funny though. She'll come in, she reads a lot of self-published stuff, and she'll come in and be like, this fucking asshole didn't know the difference between exaggerated and exacerbated. It's like, well, those are definitely different words, it's because you don't have anybody to, you know what I mean? You don't have anybody to be like, that's not it. Yeah. So, and everybody makes typos and mistakes. That's why the system is in place to catch those things. Mm-hmm. No, definitely. Yeah.
All right, John, listen, where can everyone find you and your book?
Okay. So the book is currently on the website of the publisher, which is Coprolaliac Press, which is a word I never encountered before this project. It means the inability to not be vulgar, which is hilarious. So it's I'll send you the link if you want to post it. It's
It'll be down in the description. Yep.
Yeah, so I'll send you that. We have a couple left. We did the first run we did of the book was a signed, hardcover, numbered, very nice edition with a slipcover and everything. We're almost out of those, and then we're going to do a second edition run. Those will be you can get a hardcover or a paperback. And then I am on Instagram at Garland Wells, which is very original.
Listen, John, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on, man.
Thank you, man. I really appreciate it. This was a good time, man.
Yes, man. Thank you. I try, man. I try to be the best.
I watch it. I don't watch them every day, but I have watched several of your interviews, and I really like what you're doing, and keep doing it.
Thank you, my friend. Thank you. And keep doing what you're doing too, man. You're doing some good shit. So keep doing.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it. I will truck onwards.
Everybody, go out there and check out HINTERKAIFECK. By the way, I thought I was going to fuck that name up many times. I've been hitting it.
You killed it. Yeah,
right on the
absolutely.
Fucking head. Boom.
Yeah, fucking boom. And boom goes dynamite. Yeah.
Go down into the description, and I'm not going to try to repeat Copi, whatever it was called, but the link is down in the description. Click on that, purchase that, and follow my man John, but it's under at Garland Wells on Instagram.
Yeah.
All right, everyone. Well, thank you for coming to the Horror Room. I'm Travis Bruce. See you guys fucking next time. Take care.